On today's You Asked, can you get great surround sound if your back is literally against the wall? What makes reference monitors so crazy expensive, and which TV gets closest to that kind of picture quality? And why don't OLED TVs weigh less? Isn't this supposed to be the future? Welcome back, everyone. I'm Caleb Dennison, and this is You Asked, the show where I answer questions that you asked in hopes that I can help you and others with similar tech questions. If you've got a question for me, please email it to youasked@digitaltrends.com, and we'll see if your question gets picked to be answered on the show. Tyler asks, what differences justify the crazy price tags of industry equipment like reference mastering monitors compared to high-end home TVs, and which of those professional features do you see coming into the home in years to come? Bonus question, what TV do you think comes closest to reference monitor image quality? Hey Tyler, thanks for your question. Here's the thing about super fancy reference monitors. Very few of them get sold, at least relative to the number of TVs that get sold. They are a specialty niche product that only a few people need. Also, the technology in these reference monitors is highly specific and not really suitable for consumer use. Whether it's a dual cell LCD or a true RGB OLED, those display technologies aren't really appropriate for home use because by their nature, they don't tend to get bright enough for consumer use, at least not without a whole lot of very expensive help. Also, reference monitors are generally not big enough for most folks' home use, and they tend to include video connections that are of little to no use for consumers. In short, they are a very niche product, and they're expensive to build, and not many of them are gonna get sold. That combo is gonna make them expensive to buy. But also, there are few options out there, not a lot of competition to help drive prices down. Plus, think about who they're being sold to. Hollywood folks, super high-end creators. They need what they need, and they're gonna have to pay what they have to pay in order to get it. I mean, it's also a business expense that becomes a tax write-off, which sort of takes some of the sting out of spending $30,000 on something. At least I imagine it does. Now, as for your bonus question, well, that's really what some of us reviewers are trying to figure out, right? That's what some TV shootouts are centered around, finding out which TV gets closest to the reference standard. Last year, it was generally agreed upon that the Sony A95L got closest. This year, with Sony's new 4000 nit monitor, we'll have to see. It could be the A95L, some have the LG G4 in the ring, the Bravia 9 has a lot going for it. I'm considering doing a little in-house shootout in the fall, as a matter of fact, if I can get my hands on a reference monitor just for fun. So maybe I'll have an objective answer to that bonus question later this year. Lewis from Mission, Texas writes, when OLED technology was first announced, it was said that this new technology would enable manufacturers to produce lighter weight monitors and TVs. Lewis then goes on to point out that a 2019 50-inch Vizio TV that he had was just under 20 pounds, while the 48-inch KTC OLED monitor he's replacing it with is about 35 pounds, and then he wraps up his email with, pray tell, what happened? So Lewis, I also remember OLED being touted in a similar manner, though sometimes I wonder how much of that was my hopes and inferences and how much was explicitly promoted by the manufacturers at the time. Anyway, OLED has led to extremely thin TVs. The panels have fewer layers and they don't need room for backlights, but there are two reasons I'm aware of that prevent OLED displays from getting a whole lot lighter than they are now. One is that OLED panels use both glass substrates and encapsulation glass. The glass substrate is part of the core functionality of the panel, and the encapsulation glass helps protect the display. Glass is heavy, and that contributes to the weight. I also think that as demand for higher and higher brightness from our OLED TVs has ramped up, so too have the power supplies that help deliver that brightness. Power supplies are also heavy. In fact, they're part of what makes Class AB AV receivers so heavy, for example. There's also the matter of using premium build materials. Often, heavy materials get used to give the TVs and monitors some structure so they're more rigid, and as a bonus, they don't feel like a cheap toy. But there are a couple of other factors to take into consideration too. Today's OLEDs are way lighter than the plasma displays they aimed to replace. So they deliver on the lighter display promise in that way. Also, keep in mind that premium QLED TVs are similarly heavy too. A 50-inch Samsung QN90D without its stand is about 30 pounds, which is not that far off from a like-sized OLED TV. But you can buy a much cheaper 50-inch Samsung like the TU7000, and it will weigh under 25 pounds. Generally, the more premium the TV or monitor, the more it will weigh. I know a lot of advances are being made in material science, but it seems like the old AV adage that you can judge a product's quality by how much it weighs still holds some weight. Sorry about that. Okay, this next question is a special one because the viewer has now sent this question in for 7 weeks in a row. So first off, I just want to recognize Avedis for being tenacious. I can definitely respect that. Certainly the squeaky wheel gets the grease, so there's some of that at play here, but I've not been able to answer this question until now for one important reason, and that is because it's taken until now to figure out how to make the answer meaningful for a larger group of folks. And that's important, guys, because in order for this show to be successful enough for us to be able to keep doing it, I need for it to be as accessible and relatable to as big an audience as possible. But I think I figured it out. I want to talk about what you can do to get the best surround sound experience if your seating is up against the wall, so you have no space behind you at all. First though, the question that has reappeared in the You Asked inbox 7 weeks running, Avedis writes, I was wondering what you might recommend for a receiver speakers sub combo with ceiling speakers for Dolby Atmos for an apartment. The apartment is mine and I don't mind running cables in the wall for all the speakers. The living room isn't huge and the couch is back against a wall. So minimalistic front and rear speakers are recommended and preferably wall mountable, although the last part is not a showstopper. Considering all of this, I would say sound clarity and Dolby effect is more crucial than sound loudness. For some reason, I'm committed to dedicated speakers with a receiver instead of a soundbar purely because I don't believe the soundbar will give the needed dome of sound effect. But then Avedis added a bonus question. Do you think the new Sony Bravia Theater Quad will be as efficient with a Samsung or LG TV, or will it be best to pair with only a Sony TV? Obviously, that's a lot. I hope you guys understand that specific a question. Really hard to answer on a show like this, but I think I've got it figured out. So all this time, I've been thinking Avedis was dead set on conventional speakers and a receiver, but now it seems that they may be open to the idea of the Sony Bravia Theater Quad. That's great news, but we're gonna come back to that. Let's just take a moment to talk about the limitations that having a wall right behind your seating area places on your potential surround sound experience. Most conventional speakers and AV receivers, or even high-end preamp processors and amplifiers, rely on some pretty specific speaker placement in order to achieve the most convincing, accurate surround sound experience. That specific placement involves putting the surround speakers just behind you and off to the side, kind of back at your 8 and 4 o'clock positions. And if you were going to have surround back speakers, those would go well behind you in the back of your room, firing right at your listening area. The placement of the Atmos surround speakers, again, ideally, and if they were firing down at you, would be just in front of the listening area and just outside the edges of the listening area boundary, and then again in a similar location just behind the listening area. This diagram from Dolby that we've been showing you outlines that. Now, there's always some wiggle room, right? And a receiver can correct for less than ideal speaker distance, and it can also help some with frequency response correction if your room doesn't sound great. But if your back is against a wall, you can't place anything behind you. So you will have to make some compromises. Look, I used to sell surround speakers and AV receivers and help people come up with the best systems for their rooms. And generally, I tended to discourage trying to put surround back channels up on the wall directly behind you, because I think it's not gonna help you achieve those effects that those channels are meant to create. But if you were gonna do it anyway, I'd suggest using a dipole speaker so that the sound wasn't immediately localizable to the speaker itself. A dipole helps make the source of the sound less obvious or spread out. And you can place the main surrounds off to the sides, maybe just a little bit in front of you. Now, it won't give you as immersive an effect as if they were slightly behind you and then aimed at your listening area, but it will fill in the sound a bit and it can still sound great. It's a lot of fun. For Atmos channels though, well, you can go with 2 and place them in the room out in front of the listening position like what we see in the diagram. But a second set of Atmos speakers, well, that just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. That dome of sound isn't going to extend behind you the way it's meant to. It's just not gonna happen. I just don't see a lot of value in trying to do that anyway. It's extra speakers, extra wire, extra cost, extra hassle. Don't bother. So for the speaker format and placement of a conventional speaker system, I'd plan on a 5.1.2 setup where the surrounds are elevated and off to each side, maybe just a little bit in front of you, and the 2 Atmos speakers are placed in front of your listening area and off to the sides a bit, but not all the way to the side walls. From there, what speakers should you get? Honestly, that's the kind of question I don't try to answer on this channel. There are tons of options, and to give you a good recommendation, I'd need you to answer a bunch more questions. That's a consultation, my friend, and I just can't do consultations here. I'm sorry, that wouldn't be right or fair. However, you expressed interest in the Sony Bravia Theater Quad, and that is exactly the kind of system I think would work best for many of you out there with speaker placement limitations, especially those of you who are right up against a wall with your seating. The Sony Bravia Theater Quad and the A9 that came before it, that's exactly what they're designed to handle. Dolby Atmos Flex Connect also attempts to do something similar. We just don't have a ton of experience with those systems yet. Hopefully we start seeing some come out soon. But right now, Sony and its 360 spatial sound mapping technology are the ticket, in my opinion. Their system is designed to use processing and psychoacoustics to create an extremely realistic, convincing Dolby Atmos surround experience in a number of super challenging situations. And it does that job exceptionally well. Come to think of it, actually, you can get that same 360 spatial sound mapping technology out of a Sony AV receiver. So if you are gonna do a receiver and separate speakers, I would plan on getting a Sony AV receiver with whatever speakers you choose to get. But the Theater Quad is just such a versatile, easy to play system. It's an all-in-one kind of thing. It sounds fantastic. Honestly, I'm gonna recommend it to like 90% of folks who have their backs against a wall in an apartment because it delivers the goods. Now, I might normally also recommend Sonos for such a thing, but Sonos is having some issues right now, some big ones, so I'm reluctant to do that at the moment. Now, as for the efficiency of the Theater Quad with a non-Sony TV, the Theater Quad will work well with any TV that can pass Dolby Atmos via EARC. And if your TV passes DTS:X2, all the better. You will get the full sonic experience. What you will not get if you don't use a Sony TV is a bunch of on-TV controls for the audio system, or the opportunity to use Sony's Acoustic Center Sync, which uses the TV speakers to enhance the center channel. But I'm actually rarely going to recommend using Acoustic Center Sync anyway, and the Theater Quad comes with a remote, plus the Bravia app can help control the rest, so you might not get tight TV integration, but the core of what you need the Theater Quad to do, it will do with an LG TV. It'll also work with a Samsung TV, you just won't get DTS. And for Hisense and TCL, it'll work with those as well. So let me wrap all of that up. If you have your seating against a wall and you just don't have a lot of space for surround speakers, the Sony Theater Quad, I think, is an awesome alternative to give you that effect, even with your placement limitations. And it works for all kinds of different things as well. Avedis, if you're stuck on doing a receiver and independent speakers, and I mean, that can be a lot of fun, definitely. I would say go with a Sony receiver that offers some of that 360 spatial sound mapping technology to get some of what the Theater Quad would give you out of your component-based system. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe so you can keep seeing more of this kind of content. I'll see you on the next one, and until then, here's 2 other videos I think you might like.